At this time, we'll begin our session for 30 minutes to better incident management using ITIL and Agile, part of our live eClass series. So hopefully you all can see my screen here and hear my voice clearly. I'm sure that our moderator will let me know if there's anything wrong with my voice or with the presentation. For those of you who may be interested to share this presentation with others, copies of the recording will be distributed to all participants, or actually to everyone who is registered subsequent to this presentation. And it will also be uploaded to RightStar's website and to YouTube as well. So what I'm going to be talking about today will be how we implement and how we perform incident management using our traditional ITIL framework, as well as how we can make improvements using Agile practices. So a little bit about some of my background. In addition to being an ITIL expert, I'm also a Scrum Master, a certified Scrum Master. It simply means that I have some of the knowledge and understanding of practices from both IT service management, or the operations side, as well as the development side. And I'm going to start today by looking at some of the Agile principles, talking about how that can relate to ITIL processes and specifically to incident management. And then we will talk as well about some of the specific things that you can do to incorporate specifically the Agile ideas into the incident management practices and processes that you've already employed in your environment. Certainly, as we go through, if you have any questions, please submit those questions to the Q&A panel, and we will answer those questions as best we can, certainly by the end of the presentation. So I will leave some extra time at the end for any final questions people may have. But I'll also try to answer questions as we go along. So the Agile principles I have listed here, unlike ITIL, where it's a framework, it's kept in 5 large volumes. They're expensive to buy. You can get them as digital editions, but even then they don't offer discounts, I don't think, on the electronic versus hard copy of them. Agile, on the other side of things, is basically open to everyone. So it's open source. You can easily find some of the basic principles and the Agile Manifesto out on the web. There's not a lot of structure. It's done just as Agile itself, much more collaboratively. There are vendors who have their own brand of Agile methodologies, but the underlying principles are essentially open to everyone who wants a copy of them. So the Agile principles that I have listed here, one thing I noticed as I started looking at more of the Agile methodologies and principles coming from an ITIL background as I do, is that a lot of these things can be applied just as well to the ITIL processes. So we're talking about working software is delivered, for example, on Agile principle number 3. I found that it could be applied just as easily to processes. So if we look at how do we apply Agile to ITIL processes, we focus on customer satisfaction in the processes that we provide. We welcome changing requirements, even in late development. As I often teach, when we look at change management, for example, change management contrary to popular belief, is not the prevention of changes within the environment, but the adoption of changes or the process for managing changes in the environment while preserving system production. It's expected that, obviously, as the name implies, we are going to be able to update our processes more quickly, deliver changes more frequently. And the way we do that is through a lot of cooperation and communication between the business and developers, and I would insert IT operations in the middle there if we're talking about incident management. There's also an expectation of trust among team members, and really being able to keep the constant pace. So knowing that there is going to be a lot of communication and feedback so that we can prevent issues from arising, or if they do arise, that we can resolve those issues quickly. I like also number 10 on this list, looking at simplicity. How can we make things as easy as possible? How do we improve the flow of communication so that that we don't have to spend a lot of time or jump through a lot of hoops to get the answers that we need? So things like pushing answers down to the self-service, or what we call level 0 level of support. Those types of things can really help to improve our incident processes in line with these Agile principles. I mentioned the Agile Manifesto. You can see that online at agilemanifesto.org, and I have that listed here at the bottom of the screen. I mentioned earlier that although the principles and methodologies are open source, they're open and accessible to the public, there are a number of Agile methods that are taught and documented that are, to varying degrees, somewhat more proprietary. Scrum is one that I'm more familiar with, as well as Kanban, and some of those may have open documentation, but there may be a cost for certifications. So for Scrum, for example, you can go to a 2-day course, and at the conclusion of the 2 days, you take an exam, and you are then considered a certified Scrum Master. So to give you an example of these methods, we'll take a look at the Scrum Lifecycle. So the idea here with Scrum, as opposed to, it contrasts the Agile principles with waterfall. Instead of having a project whereby we have a set of requirements early on, we spend a year, 18 months on the implementation, and finally at the end, we attempt to roll out the software or process and find that in the meantime, the needs of the organization have changed and what we've come up with no longer meets the needs of the organization. The Scrum Lifecycle, on the other hand, is in an iterative process. So every 2 weeks, we go through a review of the requirements. So we take a look at a subset, or what we call the backlog of requirements. We spend a little bit of time planning. Then the team gets together to develop the solution. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, there's a review. We present this to the business. There's feedback and a retrospective. And if everything looks good, we move forward to Sprint 2. If there are additional modifications needed, those can be added to the backlog and then added to the subsequent sprints. So there's a little bit of discovery up at the front, but really the bulk of the work or the bulk of the life cycle is spent in these 2-week sprints until ultimately we have a solution that can be considered a major release, but there can also be minor releases at any point during the Scrum lifecycle. Likewise, if we look at an example of Kanban, Kanban is the word for these cards. This started as in Japanese manufacturing, and there were cards that people would move from one phase to the next. So here you can see we have 4 separate phases. So we have our backlog is listed in the to-do section. It goes from backlog to in progress. Once it has been completed, it goes in for code review until finally it is marked as done. This specific Kanban board that I'm showing is from Atlassian's JIRA application. RightStar is an Atlassian partner, and we implement incident management for our Atlassian customers through JIRA's service desk. We do also have a partnership with BMC software, and we have a number of IT service management products, Remedy and Remedy Force most commonly among those, for which we also implement incident management. And they can be used to track in-progress work in a similar fashion. But JIRA really has, since it is a developer tool, has the most probably recognized technology in this area for Kanban. So how does this then relate to incident management? I mean, it's obvious the application of Scrum and Kanban for Agile software development, but we want to take a look at how this relates to incident management. Just a brief review of the definition of incident management. Incident management, or an incident, is defined as a disruption or degradation to normal service. The service desk is the owner of the incident management process, so a lot of the improvements and the adoption of improved methodologies would be an undertaking for the service desk. And some things to note here. The service desk really is an advocate for the customer interest. They serve as a bridge between the customer and IT, and they're really a key part to the incident resolution process, and can be key players in improvement for the incident management lifecycle. So unlike Agile, which has just 12 core principles, the ITIL, and specifically ITIL version 3 with the latest updates, has 26 separate processes. So it's a much more complex framework for IT operations. But again, we want to focus on how we can make this more streamlined and how we can simplify and increase the speed of the service in which we provide, in this case, incident management. What I've highlighted here too are the processes that are related to incident management, and arguably every single process here is interconnected. But I would indicate that the ones that I've highlighted here are certainly things that where we really need to focus. So, for example, demand management, being able to manage the demand during our patterns of business activity is critical for incident management. So we know, for example, that we need to have appropriate levels of staff during, for example, for a financial organization, it might be at month's end. For retail, it might be during the Christmas season. So that's going to be important. All of these highlighted processes here are going to be important considerations for incident management. And I don't have a lot of time to get into each of these, but just be aware that there is a lot of integration that is expected between incident management and these other processes. Here's an example of an incident model, again, just to draw on IT service management good practices. We have this process that we're expected to follow for resolving incidents. And again, from an Agile standpoint, we want to look at how we can best streamline and integrate these processes. So for example, in the traditional service desk or help desk, the service desk might get phone calls or email maybe, but really we want to move more towards web-based self-service to really increase the speed with which we can respond to our customers. And even beyond that, event management, and that's something I'll talk about here in a minute, but we really want to get better at detecting incidents or issues before they even are apparent to our end users. So the incident is identified. So perhaps it was a notification coming from our event management software. We need to determine at this point, is the service broken or degraded? If yes, then the incident is logged, categorized appropriately, prioritized. And this is an important thing here too, because certainly when, if we look at the Scrum Lifecycle, and I mentioned the backlog, and this applies for the Kanban to-do list as well, there is always an expectation of prioritization. So for Kanban and for Scrum and Agile in general, the business really provides a lot of input as to the priority or the prioritization of the requests coming in. Now, I know for some service desks that's not realistic. They're afraid that if the business is allowed or if the end users are allowed to set their own priorities, that everything will come in as a priority one. The idea here of incident prioritization, though, isn't that you respond to the person who's jumping up and down and screaming the loudest. The idea is once an incident is categorized, then the business should be able to tell you what categories get the highest priority. So for example, if you are in a retail organization, then it may be the point of sale system that gets the highest prioritization by default. Or if you are in a hospital environment, any software that's patient-facing would be the highest priority. Anything that has the potential for a biggest negative impact on the organization, or conversely, the biggest positive impact. So point of sale, you certainly want the organization or the company to still get paid. So that's what we mean here by prioritization. And then we go through, after the request is prioritized, we have a diagnosis. If there is escalation, then the incident can be escalated. The idea in Agile, of course, is that with increased communication and cooperation between teams, and by having cross-functional teams, you may be able to reduce the number of escalations. So that's something to consider here and may warrant some additional review to see if there's opportunities for that type of cross-functional support within your own organizations. And then from there, we carry on with the investigation and diagnosis, hopefully a quick resolution, recovery, and ultimately incident closure. So I referred before to the supporting processes. I won't go into a lot of detail here. I will point out that probably the process that is related to most of the other processes, the one that's most heavily connected in the ITIL lifecycle, would be the service asset and configuration management process. And at the core of asset and configuration management is an up-to-date and thorough CMDB, or configuration management database or system. So that's something that I would encourage organizations to look at if they really want to increase the speed with which they can resolve issues on the front lines. Another piece of the ITIL life cycle, so when we talk about incident management, we're talking about IT or service operations. Another phase of the service life cycle is this idea of continual service improvement. And the reason why I think it's important to mention here is because this is really what both the ITIL framework and the Agile frameworks have at their core. So it's what they both have in common. It's the basis of the CSI model as well as the basis of the iterative processes that we see in the Agile lifecycle or the Scrum lifecycle. So we look at what's the vision, and this applies not just to incident management, but to every process and service that we provide in IT. What's the vision? Where are we now? Where do we want to be? What are our targets? How do we get there? Did we get there? Measurement is very important. So we want to be sure that we have not just the means to measure our performance, but also make sure that we're measuring the right metrics. So what are our key performance indicators based on what is most critical to our organization's success? And then how do we keep the momentum going? How do we keep that cycle of improvement going? And again, that goes back to the iterative cycles that we talked about earlier in Agile. I have a few examples here of good key performance indicators for incident management. So mean time to restore service, the reduction in the number of incidents escalated. So there's a number of different measurements that you can have, and again, it will be based on what's important to your organization. Is it more important to have high customer satisfaction or low costs? So if I were going to kind of distill these whole concepts down into a few slides, these last two slides would really summarize what I've reviewed here today. So according to the Agile Principles, some of the important considerations for incident management would be to focus on customer satisfaction, be sure that your service desk is capable of and willing to adapt to changing requirements and to adapt frequently, listen daily. And again, not just to the complaining customer on the phone, but to the Tier 2, Tier 3 groups who are supporting you and to your suppliers. The other groups, in turn, should trust the service desk. It's very helpful to be co-located. So the more closely you can be located to the other teams and to your customers, the better communication and the closer relationships you'll have with those other teams. As I mentioned, measure your progress, maintain a constant pace, and provide quality technical support. So make sure that you're providing the appropriate levels of training and information to your service desk staff. Number 10 is simplify. So try to keep up to date with documentation, but don't be drowned because with Agile, the expectation is that you're focusing on working processes as opposed to a lot of operating procedures. Allow the service desk to self-organize. Again, this goes back to trusting the service desk and allowing them to work more efficiently. And also allow them time to reflect and adjust. For an 8-hour shift, it's usually estimated that you should allow the service desk team members at least 2 out of those 8 hours to do non-support activities, so activities that are more proactive as opposed to reacting to the requests or incidents that are coming in. Finally, some key points, some things to remember that I've mentioned in this last half hour. Prioritization. So make sure that you understand, no matter what level you're at in IT, what the prioritization or what the priorities are of the business. Be fully integrated with the business so that you understand what systems, what services are going to have the greatest impact on the company's success or failure. Integration. So I mentioned co-location. Anything that we can do to integrate people as well as processes. So understanding the relationships between the incident management and other processes, and technology. Really with integrating things like the incident management system with a CMDB, with a knowledge base, with problem management, with change management. Those are all success factors for improving incident management. And then communication, not just between your service desk staff and the customers or end users, but communication with IT teams and suppliers as well, and facilitating that communication. Location, I mentioned again, I'll mention the co-location and being able to have access to people who can help you to improve the incident management process and the quality of the technical support that you're providing. And then detection. So what are you doing to monitor your environment, to get out in front of some of the incidents? This arguably is more specifically related to problem management, but of course, proactive problem management is directly related to a reduction in the number of incidents that will be generated within your organization. And finally, as with any project, look at where you can recognize or realize some quick and early wins to really get this process started and keep the momentum going then once you've got those quick wins and you can demonstrate the success to your organization. This last slide, I like the emphasis on communication. If you want to do a little bit more investigation, there is this whole concept of the RACI matrix and keeping track of who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each activity within the service desk. I like to emphasize this in closing just to show the commonalities between the two methodologies. So looking at Agile and looking at ITIL, they both talk a lot about the importance of communication between the business customers and the service desk, with the technical teams, and with your external suppliers. So this has been hopefully helpful for you all to see that it's not Agile versus ITIL. Both methodologies focus a lot on communication and this iterative plan, do, check, act, also called the Deming Cycle. We feel that an ITIL approach is ideal for the adoption of ITIL and the IT service management framework. And we hope that you will discover additional ways that Agile can help to simplify processes within your organizations.